Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. Today we have a really smart person, Tro. We are in trouble, I think. This is going to be fun. She just did the Diet Doctor podcast. She's doing a ton of stuff. She's a doc, PhD with, I can't remember all this stuff because I know that you have to go through it, Adele, and tell everyone.
No,
Adele Hite, welcome.
Let me give her an introduction. Dietetics
I've got it.
Okay, dietetics trained, a PhD in communication in so we're going to call her Dr. Adele Hite, right? Do we get it right?
She's got every degree,
right.
Tro. A master's
Right?
degree in public health, registered dietitian also, right?
Yep.
Holy cow.
She's got
like,
more letters than you, Brian.
I don't have very many letters.
You were getting FFF,
I did have two.
you know, but now she's got.
Yeah. So Adele, tell us about all this stuff. And I know you had you were the creator of the dietary guidelines for the low carb movement with LowCarbUSA, Doug Reynolds, and you've done so much stuff behind the scenes. It's unbelievable. And now you're kind of breaking out into the foreground. And you know, Tro, I'll tell you, when I spoke in Boca, I was like, dear God, don't let Adele come up and ask me questions, because she gets up and asks questions that people are like, you know, and it's unbelievable.
Well,
Your
at
knowledge
least you didn't get
approach.
teased. I got a formal tease. I didn't know whether to be insulted or like, happy.
Oh yeah, that's
like,
true.
I was like, Adele mentioned my name,
I think this brings up the point that there are areas where we have subtleties of opinion, or we may have we may change what we're doing. So Adele has been there. You've done this. This has been your life and your focus. And I think you're a voice of reason. You say, look, let's reevaluate how we're talking. Use precise language, and that's one thing that I'm not real great at sometimes. So your guidance is critical in behind the scenes for sure. So tell us what your focus is now. What kind of things you are really trying to hammer home for the rest of us.
Well, I mean, your comment about precise language, it really matters. And my work has been focused on both patient care, so that's the RD part, and then policy. So I was in a PhD program in nutritional epidemiology because I thought that nutritional epidemiology would be the bridge between biochemistry and individual patients and policy. And of course, it turned out to be no such thing because nutritional epidemiology nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease specifically is a bereft theoretical approach to trying to understand what helps keep us healthy. It worked great when we were talking about diseases of deficiency or toxicity, but the framework doesn't transfer. Chronic diseases are too complex. Human lives are too complex. And so, but my focus has always been on bringing the little small picture and the big picture together. And it's really tricky in nutrition because there's a lot of stuff in between. I'll have people, Raphael Sertoli on Twitter right now is going, what about these mechanistic studies? And then of course you have Darush Muzaffarian going, if it's not in nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease, it doesn't count. David Unwin, tell your patients just to go home. So there's something that we're missing by not looking at the whole picture. And so that's really what I'm trying to do, is trying to tie those pieces together. And what I really don't want to do is to have us recapitulate the mistakes that were made in 1977 and 1980. And people all think, oh, well, that's just about changing the guidelines. and going from, you know, we got to get rid of this low fat stuff and we'll just go to low carb. But there are a lot of things that happen with the dietary guidelines that aren't necessarily about the specific recommendations to change the way that you were eating. It was that whole shift of responsibility from institutions and organizations helping to keep people healthy to you're in charge. We've told you what we've told you what the right thing to eat is. Now go out and eat it and leave us alone. You're responsible for your own health. And if you end up unhealthy, guess whose fault it is? It's your fault. It's just not that simple. And I don't want us to do that. I don't want us to turn around and tell people, well, look, we told you how to do low carb. What's the matter with you? You can't do it. And now you're fat and now you're sick. It's your problem. Quit eating those damn carbs. I sound
So
like
what's our road forward? I think those are valid points. I think, you know, part of it is this, you know, Tro and I are frontline docs and we see stuff and we see something working, we say it's working. I don't care what your RCT is saying. And obviously we're learning a lot about bias and what's published, right? Obviously this big thing with Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine publishing trash right now and having to retract a paper. You know, it's one of those things you look at and say, wow, this and that, you know, that may be just one study, but the point is that was going to lead the direction of all further research in this area, you know. And so when you start seeing it that way, when there's bias inherent, financial or whatever, I don't know. I'm hoping they're just incompetent and not devious, right? That's the hope, really. But and when you see that, and you look at some of these studies that are published, and they, you know, a lot of these studies are published just for the headline. But when you read the study, it doesn't say what the headline says it says, right? A lot of times.
right.
So how do we broach this with our clinical experience and the broad spectrum of research to say, okay, because people say, what's a healthy diet? Tell me what the healthy diet is and I'll eat it, right? And it may be different for different people.
Right. So that's the key right there. Back before the dietary guidelines came along, we defined a healthy diet by adequate essential nutrition and whether or not it kept you metabolically healthy, which they measured then by overweight. So that's what a healthy diet was. A healthy diet was getting all of the nutrients that you need. So that hasn't changed. That's still the same thing. And then keeping you metabolically healthy. Well, what happened in 1977 and 1980 is that we decided that there was only one way for people to be metabolically healthy, and that was to lower fat and to maintain this caloric balance, which is hard to do sometimes if you lower the fat in your diet because you lower the protein as well, and you're eating a lot of carbohydrate foods, which can stimulate those food reward centers, as Tro has pointed out. And so it doesn't work for everyone, but we acted as if it would and it should. And if it didn't work for you, you were doing it wrong. And if you said you followed the rules and you did it right to the best of your ability, then you were accused of being a poor reporter. Then you were accused of not telling the truth, of kidding yourself or kidding, lying on your food frequency questionnaire or lying to yourself about what you were eating. That I don't think that's okay. And one of the things that's from the clinician's point of view, because I've worked in a clinic, I had the wonderful opportunity of working with Eric Westman for 3 years in his clinic at Duke when he opened the doors to having, I think, the first practice that was, insurance pay as opposed to out of pocket. And it was supposed to meet the needs of just sort of your regular working people. But the people you see in clinic, just like the people in the Nurses' Health Study, are a selected population. You're still not seeing everybody. You're seeing people with the resources to go to the doctors in the first place. It means they have health insurance or they have some way to pay for it. Lots of times in terms of follow-up, you're seeing people who are at least semi-successful. Like you don't see people who either do really, really well on your diet and they don't need to see you anymore. Like you don't see those people. And you also don't see those people who feel like they really put their heart and soul into the diet and nothing happened. They may not come back. They might, but they might not. So both sets of looking at reality are going to leave something out. And we just need to find a better way to go, okay, well, this is the part of reality we're missing with this way of looking things. And this is the part of reality we're missing with this way of looking at things. And is there a way that we can get a broader truer, more accurate, or really less wrong? Can we get a less wrong picture of what's going on out there? And I think you're saying that not every diet works the same for every person is, I think that's pretty important. And we need to really think about what that means to us as low carb advocates and practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, we see this all the time, and I'm gonna say we want to talk about the differences, but I actually agree exactly with what you're saying. And can I typify it for you real quick? I had a patient come in to me about 6 months ago, never ate meat, never craved meat, never wanted meat, went on a low carb diet. And I told her within a week, I said, your fat oxidation is going to go up, your ketones are going to go up. You're going to actually start craving meat at some point. You're going to start craving fat if you go on a low carb diet. And she's like, there's no way I'm going to eat meat. This is literally what she said on the first visit here. I said, okay, we'll see. She has no philosophical, it's just an aversion she's had to meat. Anyway, 5-6 months later, she's lost 40 pounds. And she's showing me pictures of bacon and steak that she's texting our office, pictures. So now is the advice I'd give her in the beginning. The advice I gave her in the beginning was eat more fat, right? You're like, go ahead, go to town, eat more fat. Should I still be telling her to eat more fat to continue her weight loss 6 months later? I'm not certain of that, right? I'm not certain of that. But you can see how somebody's reward system can change over time, and somebody's strategies may need to change over time. And so giving somebody a, hey, you didn't low carb enough, that may not be the right approach. So I definitely relate with that. But I wanted to harp on one other thing. Brian, I know you're edging to get in here. We talked about the guidelines, and I think this is important because, I was watching these riots go on lately, and I'm not going to get into them, but I saw a couple pictures. I was just looking through them in the New York area, and everyone's wearing a face mask. Everyone's wearing a face mask. And I'm like thinking, holy crap, these people are like rioting and looting. Okay. But they're doing what they're told. They're doing what they're told. So it made me think like, okay, wait a second. I'm a weight loss kind of doctor. I think I focus on metabolic health and weight loss. I want to inspire change. Okay. That's so drastic that somebody can implement a new lifestyle. And, we're under the impression that the American public can't follow guidelines, right? And that, the typical medical outlook is that patients are non-compliant, right? But here we are, people are sheltering at home at a compliance rate of 90+% and wearing masks while they're looting. So,
Bro, the mask while looting is not for public protection. It's so they don't get arrested and they can't be identified.
No, but they're N95s, they're not like, so so can we talk about
Yes.
the population doing what they're told? I think you made me think, this COVID situation made me think majority of people will do what they're told. That's why it's really important to get the message better and get it as right as we can. So what do you say to that? I know this is a little, so I'm trying to get the controversy.
No, I think
here.
that's a great topic. Are people compliant or not? Well, I think you're both making really good points, which is some people are going to comply for one reason and some people are going to comply for a very different reason. And sometimes those reasons for compliance, and I don't like that word because it implies that you have complete control over your choices. And you may not. Now, when it comes to mask wearing, it's a little more obvious, but when it comes to what food is available to you and what food you can afford and what food you can create in your house at dinner time, it's not as obvious. And there are a lot of assumptions that we make about people having complete autonomy over the foods that they choose that are just simply, they don't hold out. And it drives me bonkers on Twitter when I say something like that, and the replies I get are, "Oh no, it's so easy to eat cheap. You can eat low carb cheap. All you need is you just buy $40 of ground beef when it's on sale, and then you cook it up in your casserole pans and you split it up and you put it in your freezer." Well,
what about the people in SRO housing, right? What about the people who don't even have pots and pans?
Exactly.
What about the people who don't know how to cook?
Exactly.
This is why.
so many
Yeah.
assumptions layered in there, so many that's just not, it's not a fair thing to say. It's not a smart thing to say. And to saying that those people aren't complying because they didn't choose to is, I don't think that that's appropriate.
But let's just say everybody can't afford a mask and doesn't have the know-how to get an N95. Should they wear clothes? Should they wear a face mask, right? Should they wear a cloth mask? Should they do the best they can? So is the message, the message important?
Yes.
Right? And are we getting that message?
Important.
So are we getting that message? I believe we're getting that message wrong. Okay.
Completely wrong. And and as a result, so there's two, so I had the pleasure of talking to one of the guys who wrote the 1980 dietary guidelines. And they deliberately changed the name from the goals, which the McGovern committee used, to the guidelines. And if you actually read the document, yes, it gives advice that we're not a fan of necessarily, but it's actually a pretty soft selling document. It's really kind of, well, some people, and there's a lot of caveats and there's a lot of qualifications, and they do tell you to lower your sugar along with everything else. So it is not the hard sell that we got, 10 years later with the food pyramid. That was different. Things changed between 1980 and the early 1990s. Well, what changed between 1980 and the early 1990s? You can probably tell me. What changed?
Processed foods. Processed foods came, they hit like crazy, right?
We've had processed foods.
Grains and
we've had processed foods for a long time. America gained weight. So if you look at the media around 1977, 1980, 1985, this is what you hear. Americans are really taking to this low-fat diet. Americans are taking up jogging. Americans are eating low-fat and taking up jogging. I mean, that's all about how Americans are changing their habits and changing their ways to be healthier and live longer lives and prevent chronic disease. That's what the media is saying, 1980, 1985, up until early 1990s. And then the message starts to change. And in 1994, the message becomes, well, so much for the low-fat diet and exercise craze. Americans are fatter than ever. And what happened? We had 10 years of Americans are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Americans are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But when we discovered that what Americans were supposed to be doing wasn't working, all of a sudden the message was Americans weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. So we can see that. It's very easy to see in media, but what you see in the obesity curve is just this curve going up, 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 right? So what we're dealing with is a much more complex situation than follow, not follow. So you got the low carb folks going, we followed the dietary guidelines and we all got fat. Okay, that's part of it. We got the low fat people going, we didn't follow them, and that's why we got fat.
Can I reframe it, Brian? Yes. Brian, I know Brian's like edging to get in, and he's like gonna scold me for talking so much. You know, so I just look at it very pragmatically, right? Brian probably can relate to this. You get a patient, we can all relate to it. You get a patient in the office, they come in, they got pneumonia, you give them an antibiotic, okay, they're not getting better, right? Do some tests, yeah, they have pneumonia, you were right, that's the case. Do you give them the same antibiotic, right? Do you tell them to take the same antibiotic? Do you say, take this pill once a day and, and give it and expect a different result? I think that's so either even if the patient's like, well, that drug gives me too much diarrhea, I don't like it, I don't want to take it, it doesn't make me feel good. Either the message is wrong or the messenger is wrong, right? Or the advice is so terrible that nobody can follow it to success. So I mean, that's the kind of thing. So either way, it's like, why not just?
Either way, it's not working.
Why not just? So if it worked, let's say maybe, all right, let's work with it. But it's like, we've failed so miserably. It's like, there's no question this thing needs to be trashed.
Well, I think when you look at it like that, Troy, it's like we've done it. You and I have lived that life. I've lived that life of like Melba toast and rice crackers and gained weight doing green shakes. And I'm like, how in the heck can this be? This all right? We've all lived it, right?
I've lived
So
it.
then you say, okay, this isn't working. We have to change tasks. That it's a problem. It's the same thing with lockdowns. You have to reassess and look and go, okay, we made this decision. It was an emergency. Now let's look and see the outcomes and then reassess what we're doing.
Right.
Instead of saying, okay, we made this decision, we're just going to stick with it. The food guidelines, Adele, I'm sure you're going to correct me on this, but it was meant to keep healthy people healthy, right? It wasn't meant to treat a disease. So if you have diabetes, does the food guideline apply to you anymore? Or when you have multiple morbidities? So now if we have 88% of us metabolically sick, does it apply to only 12% of people now that are healthy?
So this is the thing about the guidelines, is that they were an afterthought. We had 3 sets of guidelines come out, 1980, 1985, and 1990, without a mandate that Americans be given dietary guidelines. Okay, the mandate wasn't created until we already were realizing that the guidelines that we created in 1980 weren't working. So yeah, I mean, the whole process from the start has been screwed up. Think about what we have in America in terms of health policy. We have laws, we have court cases, we have these sort of public health mandates in emergency situations. Do the dietary guidelines fit into any of those categories? No. Did you vote on the dietary guidelines? No. Did you vote for a person who would vote on the dietary guidelines? No. None of that happened. None of the dietary guidelines happened through any sort of American due process, nor was it an emergency situation. So when we have an emergency situation, Brian, you're absolutely right. Then you take emergency measures and you tell the entire public to do a thing, and then you change your mind about it. Remember, they told us not to wear masks, and then they said, do wear masks. They changed their mind. But when you have something like this, which falls between the cracks, there's no way to really put. I spent a semester in Washington trying to find the leverage point in the dietary guidelines that would make them change, and there is none. There isn't any, because this policy was created by default almost. I mean, it wasn't even a law for 15 years. It was already in practice for 15 years. 1980, 1985, 1990, 10 years. Was in practice for 10 years before they even created a law about it. And when they created a law, they said guidelines for the general public, right? So they're not supposed to be aimed at doctors. Doctors aren't supposed to be using these guidelines to tell their patients how to avoid heart disease. They're supposed to be aimed at the general public. But when they created the guidelines in 1980, so the folks who wrote them knew that they were going to affect 2 things. They were going to affect research, and they were going to affect the food environment. They aimed the guidelines at the public. They were written for the public, but they knew that it would cause food manufacturers to change the way that they produce food, and that it would change the course of research. So Brian, when you say there's research coming out and it's garbage, and where did that come from, and why is that way? It's because researchers know. There's no law about this. there's no even policy written down about this, but researchers know that if they want their research to be taken seriously, it has to fall in line with the answer that we created in 1980 before we had the research. So this is what happened. We came up with the answer, and we expected the research to follow. And if the research doesn't follow, that research gets ignored. I mean, Nina Teichel's been really good about pointing this out. And I thought her recent letter to the secretaries, this is what the Nutrition Coalition should be doing, is not campaigning for low carb diets, because we don't need low carb diets in the dietary guidelines. We need the dietary guidelines to focus on telling us what the information, what the research actually shows, and evaluating the research for us, because so much of the research, especially in nutrition epidemiology of chronic disease, is crappy research. It doesn't apply to people. And we use food frequency questionnaires. It doesn't tell us anything about the biology of human beings. It tells us what people believe, and it tells us what a certain class of people believe. Nurses, healthcare professionals, it tells us what they think about what a healthy diet is. It doesn't tell us what they're eating.
And that's the obesogenic environment right there, right? You go to your doctor, you know, how many times have I had a patient, right? They come to me, they lose weight. You know, I just literally had a patient lose 55 pounds on low carb and intermittent fasting, goes back to the doctor and says, you're killing yourself, right? That's an obesogenic environment. And that comes from top down, right? So how do we change this top down culture? I wonder, like, how do we change this top down culture of low carb is bad? When you go to obesity week, I wrote about this. I know you read that article. You know, you go to here and you have the head of the ADA saying any diet works, low carb, high carb, and then says, you know, eat lean meats and more whole grains, right? So the top down culture is you have to lower your fat and eat more frequently. It's not what you're doing is healthy and safe and can help you on your way to being less obese and metabolically healthy. So I feel so strongly about, hey, do we need to reevaluate? I didn't. I was like, I don't want to get involved in politics. 2 years ago, I was like, I don't even want to touch this stuff. I just want to focus on my patients. I don't want to focus on, you know, you guys up there fighting the government. Don't want to be involved. But I just can't imagine a way to do this effectively without both a bottom up and a top down.
So okay, but you have to understand how the guidelines got there in the first place. The guidelines got there in the first place because a bunch of people, white, middle-class Americans, started eating a low-fat diet before we had guidelines, before we even had McGovern's goals. A bunch of people, white, middle-class Americans, started eating a low-fat diet because they're following the news, they're following the stories. The low-fat, if you look at the consumption trends, egg consumption started going down
before
a long time before the guidelines were created. So did consumption of whole milk, consumption of bacon, all of those bad foods started going down before the guidelines were created. Why is that? Well, there's actually a lot of reasons. One is we could afford better foods, better meats than than just eating eggs. Eggs were considered a poor people's food, but people began to be afraid of cholesterol long before the dietary guidelines told them to. So one of the things that needs to happen is we need to educate the public, and we're doing that. I'm working for Diet Doctor because I think that's one of the best ways in the world to help educate the public. Andreas has amazing standards. He hires great people, and that's one way to do it. The other thing is that we need to educate healthcare providers. And Tro, I heard a little bird told me that you're helping to create an organization focused around metabolic health for healthcare professionals to help them learn about these things that we know about in the low carb community. I mean, we know that healthcare professionals aren't given a lot of training in nutrition, period. And you know, people do go to medical school. My nephew, who's a doctor. The doctor, he learned about low carb diets when he was in medical school, but then he was told, as you suggested earlier, he goes, but you know, these lifestyle things, they're not really going to work, so don't bother. So, you know, doctors are taught to give medicine because they're taught that lifestyle interventions, including low carb lifestyle interventions, can't be maintained for long term. And so we need to educate healthcare professionals, and we need to teach them. You know, a lot of reasons doctors are hesitant about using low carb is they don't know anything about it. They don't know how to administer it. They don't know how to keep their patients safe while they do it. This is true of dietitians and nurses as well.
And there's also fear because you're stepping outside what how many times a day, Tro, I know it happens to you too, because it's not just me. When I say, well, you know, we talk about intermittent fasting. Well, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, doctor. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows you have to have heart healthy whole wheat, and you have to have oatmeal every day to protect your heart. They're having cinnamon oatmeal with a bunch of sugar and garbage. And it's like, okay, let me show you some insulin data. So I think the education part is very important. Tro and I, we can attest to this. When we're in Boca Raton, we're different places, people will say, we listen to, and this is part of the reason we did this podcast, is to say, I'm not the only one on an island. I'm not the only like lone wolf yelling in the wilderness. When other doctors see that other doctors are having great success at reversing diabetes or putting into remission, whatever term you want to use, making people metabolically healthy, improving their chances of surviving things like COVID, Now they're interested. So I see some docs who are just doing unbelievably great things. And, I'm interviewing one today, as a matter of fact, who's changing the world and his community.
Brian, when your patients come in there and they tell you that they need to eat heart healthy oatmeal and whole grains, and if they don't have their oatmeal is going to lower their cholesterol, they're not learning that from the guidelines. They're learning that from a package in a grocery store. Okay,
Correct.
That's how we're educating the public. Now, do the guidelines affect what's on those packages? Absolutely. So here's another lesson from history. Before the dietary guidelines, when manufacturers tried to advertise foods as heart healthy, the FDA was slapping them down. And the FDA was saying, you can't do that. That's not been proven. Once we had the dietary guidelines in place, then it became a free-for-all for low-fat, heart healthy, cholesterol-free. And we educated the public through these packages. And we saw that with gluten, right? So people learned what gluten is, not from a biochem book, but from a package. And they learned that something that said gluten-free on it was supposedly healthier for you than something that had gluten in it. Maybe it is for some people, maybe it isn't. But that's how we educate the public. We educate the public through packaging. So we have to have an educational program that educates people, that counteracts that educational program that's going on through packaging. We will never have the clout that the food industries have, but we can educate the public.
I think, again, I want to come back to that top-down approach. Patient comes to see me, they do great. They go, we send them a report. We send their primary doctor report. We talk to their trainers, and then they go back to those offices. You're dying. You're killing yourself. Do they go to the trainers? The trainers say that. They go to the personal trainers. They go to their health coach, or they go to a physician or an endocrinologist or a specialist, right? And all of these people say, you're killing yourself. And the reason why we treat our patients like a clinical trial here with labs at 0 to 4 months, remote monitoring, is because that's the level of intellectual support we need to overcome the system that's designed against implementing a lifestyle change that's low carb or intermittent fasting that utilizes these methods. So I can't imagine a way of reversing that without a top down. It's a global attack on my patients implementing these things. So but
if that top down change is that, let's just take the low fat advice and replace it with low carb advice. Or is that getting the crap out of the guidelines that shouldn't have been there in the first place? Is that raising the standards for any advice that comes out of the guidelines?
Well, I think the problem,
I don't know.
Problem is this: there's going to be different spectrums, right? You think Sean Baker's going to all of a sudden say, the guideline says I'm going to start eating more vegetables and fruit now because they say it's good, or more healthy whole wheat. The vegans are not going to say, well, I'm going to eat meat because they're saying there's nutrition vitamins. So there's going to be spectrums. There's going to be people that it's not going to be. If I tell everyone they have to be vegan, the compliance rate is going to be terrible, right? And a lot of people are going to say, screw it, then I'll die young. I don't care. I'll die a couple of years earlier and enjoy my life. But there's other people who, but I think when we come to a common ground, say, let's get rid of the processed garbage in the middle as much as we can. And either diet can be healthy for the most part, right? I think, but the point is, to me,
that's even hard to do, right? Look in the low carb community, right? Seed oils, yes. Seed oils, no. Protein, yes. Protein, no. It's like that's even hard in any community. So
right, but that's what makes a community allow a big tent, right? So you can have people who are low carb and vegetarian, even vegan. It's possible. You can do it that way. You don't have to say if you don't eat meat, you can't be low carb. Right? Just like you can say, if you want to allow some seed oils in your diet, guess what? You can still do a low carb diet. You can. It's possible. We don't have to have all of those rules in place in order to maintain the truth, which is that reducing unnecessary carbohydrates in your diet is beneficial to health. That we can prove. It's not that hard to prove it. You guys prove it all the time. Right?
Yeah, it's done in
so why are we putting all of these other rules out there that can be barriers to some people? Why
Well, I think
do that?
and I think for a lot of us, we step back and say, okay. As a matter of fact, I was just on a vegan podcast, right? And the guy was very cordial to me. He said bad stuff about Tro, so I enjoyed that part of it. But I'm kidding. I actually defended my friend here a little bit. But the point is, he's saying, look, these vegan doctors are getting people off meds and they're doing stuff with insulin. I said, cool. If that works and the patient is compliant and they're working and they're happy and they're not having other side effects or problems, that's cool with me. Because my enemy is not the vegan. My enemy is diabetes, really. I mean, the least favorite thing I have, the thing I love to treat now, but historically, Tro's going to agree with me, is diabetes, because you see the ramification. Number one cause of blindness, number one cause of cardiovascular disease, number one cause of dialysis, all this stuff that were amputation, these ulcers that are horrible. We've seen it, and we've been on the front lines, and we say, we don't like this. I don't like it. I hate it. I hate dealing because it's a chronic thing that these wounds don't heal, and it's miserable, and you have immune problems. And so when you step back and say, okay, how do I prevent that from happening? Like Jason Fung was a huge influence on me to say, okay, we see this problem. What we're doing is not working. We have to change our tact at some point.
Right.
So it's one of those things where you say, okay, what do I do? You know, and if veganism works, great. If it's carnivore works, great. Right? If it works for that patient individually.
Can I talk about that, Brian? Because this is such a valid point. But you've described two extremes. And I actually believe probably, which is, you know, you've gone completely plant-based, not unrefined food, and you've talked about animal-based unrefined food, right? And in fact, we have the data, and you've seen it too. You put somebody on a CGM before a plant-based diet, which we've implemented here, low-carb plant-based diets. You know, we've done these. Their CGMs look flat. You put somebody on a carnivorous diet, their CGMs look flat. Right.
Okay.
So you can definitely get similar outcomes. And if you look at the literature, interventional studies, right, it's always the extremes of diet that do very well. They've done head-to-head studies, A to Z trial. I mean, they've done a number of head-to-head studies where the mixed macronutrient diets tend to, you know, I find my interpretation of literature that the kind of the more extreme macronutrient kind of diets do better for weight loss and blood sugar. Like the most impressive
trial was classic Atkins, though, and Atkins never forbid anybody from eating vegetable oils.
Yeah, so we're coming to vegetable oils. Yeah. So let's come to vegetable. You know what? My take. Anyway, the point is you can succeed. You could succeed on plant-based, and you could succeed on low carb. And in fact, I guess my point of saying that is, if we are very diet agnostic, flexible dieting, promoting, that I think, you know, we will probably get less than desirable results. And at least the literature, I think, hints that way, you know, with regards to the interventional studies. So,
but if you say,
so like very low fat would be better than a mixed diet, you know, in my opinion, for weight loss and diabetes reversal. So I would.
So what do you mean a mixed diet? Like what's a mixed diet?
Yeah, like if you go to Zone, like if you compare plant-based to Zone, you know, plant-based typically does better.
Right, but right? Atkins does just fine.
Yeah,
right?
So does Atkins, right? I'm on the Low Carb MD podcast, so of course I support low carb diets.
But Atkins, when Atkins started, did not, and as far as I know, Eric Westman did not when I worked for him and does not now, exclude veg oils. He wants people to get, and for that matter, I mean, I remember seeing patients who, we had a guy who they still had these then, traveling salesman, right? What do I eat? I'm on the road all the time. You know, Eric taught him how to order your pizza, have it delivered to your room like you usually do, and then just scrape off the toppings and eat them with a fork. And that's what he did. Yeah. And he did great. So here's the thing. What population does diabetes affect the most? Where do we have the most complications and the most instances of diabetes? We have them in our low income and our minority populations. We have in those populations that may not have the resources or the social capital, the cultural capital to tell their doctors, you know what, I'm not going to do what you told me to do anymore. I'm going to do something different, right? So those people need our help more than anybody else. Sean Baker doesn't need our help.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about them. Let's talk about those people because, you know, I was going over the Faith DM trial, right? The Faith DM trial was basically a trial that was an interventional trial with food banks. They went to local food banks and they they recruited patients and literally gave them foods based on the guidelines: fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, whole grains. And this was the poorest, low income, least education people, the people that would be helped by an intervention that's following the guidelines as best as they could, right? Which is more fruit, more vegetables, more grains, real foods. They literally gave them these foods. That was the intervention. And it was a 6-month trial, and they were expecting to see changes in diabetes, right? Diabetes markers improving, weight improving. And despite doing that, literally giving them these foods, there was no changes in outcomes. So it made me really think, okay, do we really need to evaluate what we think is healthy, what we think will affect diabetes, what we think will affect? They literally gave them food. So I don't know if you've seen that trial, but it really made me think, holy crap, we need to reevaluate our thought process, our advice, our approach, what we think is healthy food.
Right. Well, so I'm gonna, yeah, absolutely. Low carb would have worked better. So why weren't they given low carb as an option? That's the question. The question is not whether low carb would have worked better. For diabetes, it would have worked better. I mean,
it's not what you're adding in. It's not what you're adding in. It's not what you're not taking away.
What you take away.
Burritos and nachos and French fries every day, then it's useless. Like the school lunch is a joke. Because you can make it as healthy as kids aren't going to eat an apple. They're going to go across the street to the fast food restaurant and eat it. That's just the way it is.
Not necessarily, but because I have a friend, Daisy Zamora, who was a PhD student at UNC when I was there, and she did a study using I want to say the ERIC, she used the study looking at a data set of adolescents as they aged, and it was oversampled for African-American teenagers and white teenagers. And what she found is that the healthier the diet of the African-American teenagers over the course of, as they aged, the more weight they gained. For everybody gained weight. The curves both went up, but the healthier the diet was, according to the dietary guidelines, the more weight the African-American teenagers gained. So there.
Wow. What study was that? I'm going to write that one down because I want to read that one.
Her name is Daisy Zamora, Z-A-M-O-R-A, and I think it came out in 2010.
Right.
Anyway, I mean, it's a landmark study, and but this is not something we don't know. So we have known in bits and pieces and mechanistic studies and in small population trials and things like that, that different groups of people, and you don't have to divide them up by race, you can divide them up by insulin sensitivity or something else. But we do know that different groups of people react to different food patterns differently. And this happened to be a food pattern that was particularly unhelpful for that group that
obesogenic.
Mm-hmm.
Obesogenic, right?
Well, I don't, are the humans obesogenic, or is what they think they're supposed to eat obesogenic? I wouldn't call them obesogenic.
No, the food.
Right. Well,
yeah.
The food, but this was a more healthy diet. So she separated the populations out according to, who's eating healthier and who's eating less healthy. And for this particular population, if you ate a less healthy diet, according to the dietary guidelines, you would actually do slightly better. So my point is that the population who needs us the most isn't getting the advice that we're giving to the people who walk into our office. And why is that? Well, part of it has to do with the guidelines, right? But part of it also has to do with the fact that the low carb community doesn't make it easy for other people to come on board and to be taken into the fold without bombarding them with 8 million little rules of how you're supposed to eat. And, you have to have, your fat ratios have to be X percentage more than your protein ratios and blah, blah, blah. And, you can never have vegetable oils, and, you can't have fast food. You can't have diet soda.
We use we leverage fast food. So I completely agree with you. It has to be easy. You have to make it easy. And we work within, we had a patient, and we're publishing this actually with Dr. Eric Westman. He's curating a journal, which we submitted an article to just 2 days ago. We have a patient who literally came in always going to Wendy's. Okay. Do we tell them you can't do a low carb diet or you have to go low fat? No, we said, keep going to Wendy's. Just throw out the buns, right? Just throw out the buns. And his triglycerides went from above 1,000 to under 200. Okay. And so this will be published because it's the highest documented dietary intervention showing a triglyceride drop of over 1,000 just by and working with what the patient can do. So, you know, and do they use vegetable oil on those patties? I have no idea. You know, I don't know, you know, but at that point it's like, so, but now then we get into the nuance, which is, okay, what is the best somebody can do? Because sometimes people ask me, you know, what should I do? And it's just, if you're already at Wendy's, get a hamburger patty. But then what's the best I can do? You know, and maybe that's like where some of this, you know, maybe the discussion of seed oil comes into play. My interpretation of the seed oil data is that, look, if you can afford avocado oil and olive oil, go ahead. It doesn't seem to be a big reason not to pick an omega-3 oil over a omega-6 oil. Now, the refined oils that are, you know, and how they're used may not be so healthy, but honestly, just do your best. Right. So what do you know, how do you feel? Like I've looked at some of that mechanistic data and some of the, you know, there's some data with seed oils and, you know, lung cancer, there's data on, you know, association data, but then there's the opposite data. The most interesting data that was like a null finding, I'd say, or against the common theme that the low carb community puts out. They literally did fat pad biopsies of people and compared them to their mortality, literally measuring their omega-6 and omega-3 ratio and comparing the cardiovascular mortality. And there was no real big conclusion, right? Like seed oils, like I shouldn't say seed oils, but omega-6 oils were inconclusive at best. So, I mean, is there, you know, but then you have data that shows that, look, if you are heating and cooling these oils, they can become trans fats and, you know, so where does it, like, what's the best I can do and what should I do? And do you think there's a difference, you know?
I think the question, what's the best I can do? And both of these questions, but when somebody asks what's the best I can do, it's what's the best I can do for what outcome? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What's the best I can do for, you know, having my omega-6 and omega-3 ratios balanced? Like, if that's your goal, if you want to do that, I can tell you how better to do that, right? But why are you doing it? That's the question. But if the question is, what's the best thing that I can do in order to get adequate nutrition, adequate essential nutrition, and to avoid metabolic disease, I don't know that seed oils factor into that.
So here, I got a question for you. Avocado oil or, you know, highly refined soybean oil? You know, what should I use in my kitchen? I can afford either one. Which one should I do?
What are you doing with it?
I don't know. Sauteing, frying, who knows? Whatever. I don't know. Putting it in, my wife will probably put it in any, you know, food that, you know, she'll make rainbow cookies that I'll have to avoid like a crack fiend. That's what she'll do. Low carb rainbow cookies that I'll have to avoid like a crack fiend. So that's where they'll go. So which one should I use? And my bias is, I seem to think I need more omega-3. I see some negative data on some seed oils, at least inflammatory data and some. So I'm like, okay, you know what? And I have more omega-6 in my diet than ever before, really.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, you know, if I had to guess, I'm guessing that the omega-3 is probably better for me. But I don't know. I mean, I don't really know.
Right,
so what should I do? What should I do? I'm the legit question, you know?
I think. So your answer, so here's where it comes down to the individual. Your answer, can I afford avocado oil? Do I like the way it tastes? It's good in my salad dressing, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get the avocado oil. I'm allergic to avocados. I'm going to take the soybean oil.
Got it. Okay.
Easy.
So what about olive oil then? You know what I mean? So what's the best?
Okay, olive oil.
What's the best choice I could make, or does it not matter?
Right. I think that when it comes to what you're using it for, when you're cooking, you want something stable. And we know that those are the saturated fats or the more saturated fats, right? But there are some vegetable oils or seed oils that are more heat stable, like peanut oil.
Soybean, I think, is like 500 degrees, right? Avocado is like 550. I mean,
right. So, but if you're making salad dressing, then maybe you want to go for flavor. I like olive oil. So,
right. What oil do you cook with?
I cook. So first of all, my husband does the majority of the cooking in our house. I cooked for 20 years. And then when I had to take biochemistry when I was 46 years old, I was like, you know what? I can't learn biochemistry and cook dinner every night. So we're gonna have to pick here. So my husband does most of the cooking and he uses peanut oil.
He uses peanut oil. Got it. Okay. So which is a seed oil, right? Peanut is no, well, yeah.
A legume.
A legume oil.
Legume oil. So no, but so I think the problem here is what is the quote unquote best you can do and what matters and doesn't really matter. People ask me about grass fed. I'm like, I don't buy grass fed, but if I could afford it, I would. Do
you like the way it tastes? Like I like pasture raised pig, but I'm not a huge fan of grass fed beef.
Yeah, I don't like it, but I mean, in terms of health
it's the same advice though. Isn't the same advice as like what works for you? At some point we have to come back to what works for you. If I have someone who drinks a gallon of wine every night, I go, can you do it every other night? And what's acceptable? And then you start feeling that if you're going to smoke 2 packs a day, it's like, hey, if I can get you down to 1, I'll be happy for a while, then I'll bug you again down the road. Because quitting right away is it's a stressful thing. I mean, every day someone asks me, doctor, you don't eat bread. I said, well, I don't eat Weber's bread ever. But if I go to the nicest restaurant, I might not. Most of the time I don't, but I could if I want to, right? It's not a big deal. If you have it once a month or once every 2 months, it's not going to kill you. Having pizza once a month is probably not going to kill you. But you have to understand it's a spectrum. For me, as a matter of fact,
pizza is toxic. Pizza is toxic.
Yeah, it's toxic. I would agree if you do it every day.
Right? Yeah.
But, if you do it every now and again. But the point is, I think, you have to reach the person. It's just like church. You reach someone where they're at. So you have to be a perfect person who never cusses or dead. Otherwise, Troy, you can come to my church. I'll even let you in there, man. But the point is, you take people where I'm joking, man. But there's points of you say, look, what works, and then we say, let's change where you're at some point. Let's keep working and make us better as we have to do. I'm not going to run a marathon, but I may start like let me try a 5K and see how that goes, right? So I think it's a spectrum, and we have to reach the person where they're at. You can't go into Guatemala, for instance. My friend goes, look, you're going to kill these people if you tell them not to eat rice and tortillas. They'll execute you right on the spot. But if you say, hey, look, let's reach them, let's educate, and say, hey, look, maybe get rid of the sodas first. I mean, I'll tell you, one of my good friends and my neighbor, his sugar was 3 days before Memorial Day, 496. He lost 40 pounds. Well, great. You lost weight. That's so you're healthy. No, you lose your weight the wrong way because you can't absorb nutrients. So anyways, his sugar's right now, 98, 102 in 2 weeks. Why? Wow. He cut out sodas. He cut out juices. He cut out all the crap food he was eating. And he's not on insulin. I begged him to go on insulin actually initially because I go, I'm scared because I'm not your doctor. And his doctor was out of town actually, of course, perfect storm. Anyways, it's one of those things. He has a CGM now. He absolutely is educated. He knows exactly what happens when he eats certain foods. So he said, I'm not doing that. He saw a spike with an apple and he goes, oh my gosh. I go, for now, but down the road in a year, you can have apples because you're not at emergency gate, right? So it's different than what I'm saying is our advice hasn't changed for a 23-year-old ultra marathon runner, as compared to someone who's sedentary that doesn't do anything. And they say, okay, and what works for you? Everything that you're talking about, Brian, argues against having low carb dietary guidelines as a health as a national health policy, because what you're talking about is working with people individually in a clinical setting and meeting them where they are and helping them to get better. And if we decide that everybody in the US needs to go low carb and we start making that a national nutrition policy, it's going to have it may have a more negative effect than the low fat guidelines, because what's going to happen? People are going to follow them sort of. They're going to follow them partially. The food industry is going to get involved,
I mean, it's just going to change the whole nature of the beast. What we need from dietary guidelines, or we need accurate information. We're not getting that now. But if we could get some more of that, first of all, the saturated fat cap would go out the window because there's no evidence for that, right? So when we talk about changing the world, I think that we have to change it in clinics, and we have to change it by individuals, because that's how we got the guidelines in the first place. We didn't get the guidelines because somebody campaigned for them. That didn't happen. That's not what was going on.
So should we just scrap it completely?
I would love that. That would be a dream come true for me.
Me
Yeah.
too.
That's my
second that
too.
motion.
Oh my gosh, we all agreed. But that's true. I think you say, look, it's idiotic to have these guidelines. Why? Because my nutritional needs can change over the next 6 months. So you're going to tell me to eat one way, and it just doesn't make sense. And so people come out and say, you and Tro are zealots, or not. They usually call Tro a zealot. They don't call me a zealot as much. But the point, I don't know why that is, Tro. We have the same views on everything. It may be just the presentation. But point is, you look at it and you go, wait, it doesn't make sense. If 88% of Americans are sick under these guidelines, you say, well, this not working. It's just not working. It doesn't make any sense.
And it doesn't matter if they're not working because people are following them, or if it's not working because people aren't following them. That makes no difference. They're not working. They didn't do what they set out to do. And as a policy, that's how our policies should work, right? Like, is the policy doing what it's supposed to be doing? And if it isn't, it needs to be scrapped. So that's where we are.
It's the same thing as a parent. I don't make rules that I don't enforce, right? I don't set a curfew and say, oh, we're not going to enforce a curfew, but we made it. Don't make the curfew, because it sends a message, right? Don't set a curfew if you're not going to enforce the curfew. So it's those kind of things where you say, okay, look, we set guidelines. If no one's listening, great. If everyone's listening, they're doing. If I'm a teacher and everyone's failing my class, like Jason says, then it's the teacher's problem, not the student's problem.
Yeah.
So when everyone's having issues, but my argument, my only argument for saying if you're going to have a guidelines, have it be more low carb, is that 88% of us are metabolically sick. The best way for metabolic health is a low carb diet, in my opinion.
Right.
In my experience.
But the best way to get low carb diets turned into something that doesn't look like a low carb diet to you is to put them in the federal government.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
You know, when Nutrition Coalition and these other groups started going, we want low carb diets, talked about in the dietary guidelines, that was their first mistake, because they shouldn't have said that. They should have said, we want diets that use less than 50 grams of carbohydrate a day, talked about in the dietary guidelines. But that's not the language that they used.
How about this? What about the individual groups, like the American Diabetes Association?
American Diabetes Association is already changing its tune. Now, it took them 15 years, but they're changing it. And it's really interesting to watch the progression of that change, right?
Yeah, it's only going to get more and more. It's only going to get more and more.
It's going to get, it's going to get more and more because of CGMs and our clinical experience. But people had to fight the fight. Like
CGMs is immediate disproof. The CGM is the immediate disproof of everything the Diabetics Association has been said for the last 20 years. It's unfortunate that, even as talk to doctors today, they're like, it's all weight loss. I'm like, yeah, explain that to my bariatric patient on day 2 with a CGM, or my low carb patient on day 2 of a CGM. So the biggest lie detector ever.
My friend just lost 40 pounds. Good job. Keep sugars 500. You're losing weight. Great. We're achieving our goals. It's idiotic. It's crazy. It is absolutely nuts. Because I said you're going to gain weight at first. Don't worry. Why? Because you're not massively dehydrated anymore. Right?
Can I ask you both a question? What would it take for you to change to recommend a change to the dietary guidelines? What would it take? Like, let's say, what type of study, what type of evidence, and Adele, I'd like to start with you, but Brian, I'd also like your opinion. Adele, what would it take for you, like a Predimed style trial showing an improvement in mortality? What would it take for you to say, this is why I think or at least there should be a low carb exception in the guidelines, or something that says, what would it take for you?
So the guidelines don't have enough evidence to say what they're saying to start with. Right. So the whole idea of the guidelines is the guidelines are going to prevent chronic disease in healthy people. Now, how much evidence do we have that a low-fat diet prevents chronic disease in healthy people? How much evidence do we have? What's our evidence base for that?
Not much. It's
No,
just it's just epidemiologic data, really.
It's zero. We
Yeah.
don't
Zero.
have evidence. It's right. It's all nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease. It's
Right.
all food frequency questionnaires. It's all surveys. We don't have any evidence that a low-fat diet is going to prevent chronic disease in an otherwise healthy person. Now, how much evidence do we have that a low-carb diet is going to prevent disease in an otherwise healthy person?
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So what would it take for you? What would it take for you to make, would it be a 5-year study showing improvement in outcome? Like, what would it take for me?
A 30-year study with hard endpoints, hard clinical endpoints, an RCT where we are filming everybody's mouth 100% of the time to see what food goes in.
Yeah, I think we all agree. It's like, look, it's not working. It doesn't work. And you have to say, okay, look, for me, I'm looking at my clinical experience. Again, this neighbor going from 500 to 100, right? Sugars of that is reversal of disease, or whatever you want to call it, remission of disease. But the point is, if I can reverse a disease with if I can reverse cancer with a certain treatment, then I could probably prevent it with that same treatment, I would think. Right?
Maybe
Common sense.
not. Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
You know?
Maybe not. So what I'm saying is, look, if we're looking at our healthcare system right now as we stand, like we said, emergency measures require emergency tactics, right? And then you have to reassess it at some point. But we know our number one killer is diabetes and metabolic disease. There's no doubt about that. There's no question about that, right? So when we're looking in the face of a disaster that's coming,
I thought our number one
it's
killer
already
was
here.
heart disease.
Well, heart disease, look where it's coming from. Diabetes, the vast majority of those cases are diabetics or pre-diabetics, right? You're looking at insulin resistance and all this kind of stuff. So of course that is. But you have to look at the underlying cause. That's the root cause of all this stuff.
Right.
So
well,
I think
your idea of a root cause and somebody else's idea of a root cause may be different. And that's where the problem of cause and chronic disease, we don't have that sorted yet, right? We don't.
Correct, but we know what makes it worse. There's no doubt. If I take my neighbor, if I would have taken with a sugar of 500, I'm gonna put you on a low-fat diet, and you're gonna have healthy whole wheat, and you're gonna have his sugars would be 700.
Right. No,
I know that.
agree with
Anyone
you.
knows that.
I
There's
agree
no
with
doubt
you.
about it. So you take out the inciting force, but the vegans have a point. If you're eating a ton of fat, like people are pouring butter and everything, and eating fat all day long, you're gonna have bad outcomes too. I think that's just what we're seeing. And so you go, okay, it's an energy problem. We're over nutrition really in America.
Right. And what addresses overnutrition? Adequate essential nutrition, particularly adequate protein. When your body is fed, you lose the drive, or it becomes a much less powerful drive to overeat. One of the most fascinating things I remember seeing in the clinic, and this will get back to Tro's favorite topic about food addiction and things like that, is women who would come in and they'd say, I know you're going to tell me to, about this diet and everything, and I'm going to try it, but I can't do it because I'm an emotional eater. I'm addicted to food. There's nothing I can do about that. And then these same women, after 2 months on a low carb diet where I am tracking them and making sure that they're getting adequate protein throughout the day, these women would come in and they go, "Oh my God, Adele, you'll never guess what happened to me." And I was like, "Yeah, I can guess. I'm going to tell you what happened. You forgot to eat lunch." "How did you know?" So because for the first time in their lives, their bodies weren't being driven by, "Please get me some real food. Please go and get me some real food. Okay, you got me some low-fat yogurt, but that's not real food. I need some protein. I need something that's actually going to nourish my body." And when you could get them to eat a diet that was adequate in protein and adequate in essential nutrition, all of this emotional eating went away. Now, it didn't go away for everybody, because I have a couple of patients in my mind who still struggled, but it did go away for a lot of people who thought that they had emotional eating issues. And
I
we
think,
just fed them.
I think, I'm going to talk about this because I feel strongly about it. I wonder if it's protein or the lack of carbs and fat together.
Both.
Right?
Both.
Or both.
Yeah.
Because, you ask somebody on day 2 of a fast, they're like, "I've never been less hungry." If you ask somebody on day 2, I'm not a big proponent of extended fasts, but if you ask somebody on day 2 of a fast, if they're hungry or not. So I think ketosis probably has unique benefits on appetite suppression, acting centrally And the stable glycemia is another aspect, right?
Yep.
If you're not, and David Ludwig just showed this, which I love. He showed that energy roller coaster from high carbohydrate diets. He just put this in the medical literature last week, where you're literally energy deprived within 1.5 to 2 hours on a high carbohydrate diet. This is total blood energy. I mean, we all know this. Why are you hungry 3 hours after eating pizza? Why are you eating the cold pizza and it tastes better, right? Why are you, after 3 hours Chinese food, eating the cold Chinese food and it tastes better than before? Because your brain is hungry for food. It's literally energy deprived. And he finally showed this in the literature. But I think that, I wonder if it's the protein, or partly the protein, partly the absence of carbs, partly the ketones.
Hey, Tro, we're going to have to do a part 2 on this one.
Oh, man.
I knew we'd run over. I knew we would, but people get mad at us every week.
No, but this is it. People want to hear
We're going to do this right now. I know. We have to do a whole episode. We can do an hour on this because I really, really want to pick your brain on that because I think it's a critical topic. I think the
food addiction, right? Yeah, and
the food addiction and what we're seeing clinically, and your opinion and what you, I think that may be one of our most valuable episodes we can have. Really, I think it's very, very, very important. People have to understand that part of it. I think that is the missing key that we're missing. All are missing. Because again, if you tell someone, oh, just have a little bit of wine, you're an alcoholic. Some people can have a little wine and be fine. I can have a glass of wine and be fine and say, okay, I'm just having one glass because I'm trying to lose weight. Other people, one glass, they say, screw it. I'm going to have 12 glasses. I'm going to drink out of the bottom. They end up in a gutter somewhere. So I think there's definitely points to that because we just interviewed Ken Armstrong, who's one of the nicest people on earth, and he lost a ton of weight. And what happened? He had one cookie. It wasn't because he was stressed. It wasn't because he didn't have good social support. It wasn't because he had mental illness. He had one cookie and he went off the rails for 6 months and gained 60 pounds. Right. And then he couldn't get back. Rob Seifus says the same thing. So I would love to pick your brain on this topic and say, okay, because everyone says, well, just have a balanced diet. Well, just have a little glass of wine.
Yeah, but
it depends on the person.
Doesn't make any sense because your diet has to be adequate first. So
nutritionally adequate, right? You're eating for nutrition, right? Totally. All right. We'll have a great talk on that, Tro. This is our teaser for that. Everyone's going to want to listen.
I'm literally, I'm going to have my,
we're going to make it happen right now.
We're going to schedule you. We're going to schedule you. Okay. We're going to schedule you because this is it. I think
she's saving the world.
Yeah. If we haven't scared her off, I think smart people talking about differences in opinion is what's needed in a cordial way, because I love the fact that you're like, we don't disagree. No, we don't agree. There's so much we don't agree on, but 90% we agree on. And I think as we talk through, I learn, maybe I need to change my viewpoint. I mean, you learn on somebody that's seeing things a little bit differently than you, and the onlooker learns from us just talking about it. And so I really think it's important. I'm gonna have you on again. I'm gonna literally make it happen so you get on again if we didn't scare you off.
Okay,
that's my caveat. I gave people that caveat. It's like if I disagree with Rob Seifus or Jason Fung or Adele, they're probably going to be right. So, down the road, I'll change my opinion probably. But, it's true. I think we have to be at that point. When you know all the answers, you're non-teachable. People like tease Tro and I for making fun of ourselves, but we're on a road to learn. We really are. We don't have all the answers. We can't pretend like we do. So having someone like you and this is your life and what you do, we talk about those things and we say, okay, I get where you're coming from, and let me try it. Let me implement those things and see if it works, and for that patient in front of me, because that's the bottom line. We all want to help people. We all want to have a healthier society. It's not about who's right and wrong, because look at Tim Noakes reversing himself completely. I mean, we have to be able to do that because we're no better than anyone else if we just stick to it. They say this is the way it is, no matter what the evidence says. I'm doing this right because I'm right. It's idiotic.
To be about that person in front of you. It has to be.
Yeah, that's what it all comes back to. This N of 1. I love that. It's an N of 1. What works for you? If eating gummy bears works for you, okay, I'm not going to argue. If your sugars are normal, everything. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. But the point is what works, what's acceptable in life. Because people have to live their life. You can't say you can never, ever in your life have this again. Come on. The purists are killing it. Really, it's the purists when you don't say, hey, what works for you? Right. And I think that's what we all three agree on is like you have that person in front of you, you want to help them. And, it may not be ideal, but that's the best we could do at this point. Maybe down the road it changes.
Yep.
Yeah. Burger King and pizza.
So Dale, you have any
parting ways to low carb on Burger King and pizza? So
you have any?
Look, can I just say a separate thank you?
Bro.
No, one more thing. I want to thank her for all her work on getting the nutritional, kind of recommendations and guidelines with LowCarbUSA, which is really going to be that segue into this organization we were talking about, you alluded to, we are going to take that and make a non-for-profit around that and educating doctors. We were going to run a conference here in New York, completely not-for-profit with IDM and LowCarbUSA. Because the idea is we need to educate more people. We need to do work on that top-down approach, educating doctors, educating residents, educating medical students on and everything you've done in that regard with Doug Reynolds and LowCarbUSA. It's just amazing stuff. And if we can piggyback off of it, I know Brian's got to go.
I got to do my I got to go, but I want to do my.
I want to thank you for everything that you're doing, and it's all good work.
And I'll tell you, I think the biggest compliment, one day Doug Reynolds called me. Doug Reynolds from LowCarbUSA called me, and he was shaking, tears in his eyes. He said, "You will not believe this document that Adele just sent me." And I get emotional. I get goosebumps thinking about it because it makes such an impact, because we need to have a clear agreeing to disagree on certain topics. Say these are what the standards are that we do, and this is where you have some flexibility. Here's what's safe. Here's what's not safe. Here's the monitoring. And when you have guidelines, then now all of a sudden you have somewhere that will help us to. They're not hard, fast rules where you have to do this, but when you have something like that, and that's the genius of what you do, is say, okay, where do we go from here? It's a disaster we're in. Where do we go from here? So really your leadership and your level-headedness and not being afraid to confront the establishment. I mean, that's a huge deal, because it's scary. I don't want to deal with those guys, so you have you're a tiger, I would say. You're very kind, but you say, look, this is not, there's no evidence for this. Whether I like you or not, there's no evidence for what you're saying.
So I just want to say, so parting words is that thank you all for having me on. This was a lot of fun, but I want to say that if you and Doug are working towards a professional organization, a nonprofit that's going to deal with metabolic health, and there's any way that I can help you, I'm there. I will put other things aside and I will help you work on that, because that would be a dream come true for me, to have a professional organization that's not called low carb physicians, that's not called, keto comrades, but that's focused on what we're really concerned about, which is not the diet, but the health. So I love that you're thinking and talking about metabolic health, and I would love to help you just make that happen and make that a success.
The Society of Metabolic Health Professionals.
I love it.
And the goal will be to take some of these, because Doug's spent a lot of his own money getting these conferences going. People don't realize, there's no money. We lost $10,000 trying to get this Low Carb New York conference, and even more. That's not even including what trying to get this conference set up just to educate people. So people don't realize that it really should be a not-for-profit. And it really should be something that people can donate to, and somebody can be a part of mentorship, research. And so we need to get that started, and we would love your help. So we'll definitely be in touch.
Great.
Okay. All right, guys.
Adele, how do people find you? Diet Doctor, right?
Yeah, I'm all over Diet Doctor. You can find me there.
And Twitter and all that stuff. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you a ton. So everyone, thanks for sticking with us. I know we went a little long. I'm going to be in trouble with my wife because I have to help her with something in her office, but it's worth it. This is great. I always learn from you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And we are going to do part 2. Schedule it right now.
We'll make it happen.
All right. There's the teaser. Everyone's like, oh no, I want to hear the end. It's the worst. But when you hear it, you're going to be happy. So thank you all.
Bye.